So this is going to be kind of a cool or exciting evening because we have some special things to talk about. This concept of light workers, who are light workers, what is a light worker, and so on. Now, even if a person thinks, oh, that's kind of a specific topic, it may not apply to me, it really does. So let me share this a bit and cover some different ideas and cover some different things. And then when we're done, I'll share a couple of new announcements with you and we'll go on from there. But tonight, you could say it's along the lines of who and what is a light worker, or really it's about light workers and where it all began, this term, where it all began and where we're going. Because we are all light workers. The idea is, what is a light worker? And think about this, like, who are we to call ourselves light workers? Or is it just a figure of speech? Is it just a phrase? It isn't. The term light worker means we are working on our light. We are working on developing our light. Now, that is fairly acceptable to most people that are in the genre of spirituality, right? But it gets better than that, because it's not just like, ooh, how neat, kind of like we're called this and that. We're called hippies. We're called new agers. We're called light workers. It's not just a buzz phrase. It means that we are dedicated to remembering who we are. And who are we to call ourselves light? Well, who gave us that right? God did. God is light and love. And God said, I'm making my children in its image, it says. I'm making my children in my image, and I am light. Therefore, my children are light. So we are light. So light workers are really people that are working on remembering who they are, which is an accurate statement. How are light workers different from people on the spiritual path? There is a bit of a difference, and it's maybe important to some. People on the spiritual path could be very casual about it. They could be resting on the spiritual path. Light workers are working at something. They are going somewhere. We are dedicated to something. We're not just like kind of reading, kind of meditating, kind of improving our lives, or, kind of being of service to other people. Light workers, you could say, are like people on the spiritual path, but on steroids, spiritual steroids. They're people on the spiritual path, but with an absolute dedication. There's a mission, like we're going somewhere. So that's kind of, you could say the beginning of it, or the inception of what it means. Now, there's something else that might be important. Where did the term come from? Well, a lot of people, and on the internet and here and there, have said that I, Michael Mirdad, created the term light worker. I would like to think that it's been used in some way throughout time. Technically, light workers have always existed since the beginning of time. Ever since there was a single being ever thinking about awakening, which is the beginning of time, really, there's been light workers. But when was the name coined? A lot of people say that I did. I guess it's possible because according to the, progression and records that people have out there, it's a term I used when I had a newsletter back in the 80s that I called the light bearer. So we're bearing lights, we're light bearers. That's the newsletter. And then in that newsletter in the 80s, I was making reference to us being light workers. It was just playing off the term of light bearer. So I've not heard the term before, and nobody else seems to have had it before the 70s and the 1960s and the 1800s and so on. So some people have credited me with being the first to use the term, I guess. Again, I'd like to think that it's been earlier than that. I'd like to think that people used it in the Renaissance, Middle Ages, wherever, or even further back. The concept existed a long, long time, since the beginning of time. But use-wise, okay, yeah, I might have been the first in the 80s. Nobody else really has staked a claim until maybe 10, 20 years later. But I started using the term in the 80s, and I explained why already, because of its definition. Then I think the second time it's been showing up is almost around 1990. A colleague and friend of mine, Patricia Cota-Robles, she wrote a book. It was called The Next Step. And in there she mentions the term light workers. And that's around 1990. Then around 1995, I developed an idea to have a conference. So I thought, hey man, let's have a conference that is, and it became called the Universal Lightworkers Conference. I chose universal because it meant there's nothing greater. instead of planetary light worker, global light worker, earthly light worker, national light worker, international light worker, and so on. I just thought, what could be better? Let's go universal. So we had the Universal Lightworkers Conference, and I asked a couple of friends of mine if they wouldn't mind kind of running that and taking care of it. So they sort of became the facilitators and coordinators of it, and it took off like that. It was partly to embody or create an event around light workers, this idea called light workers. I had no idea that the term would ever take off. And for the most part, it never did until more internet and more Facebook pages. Websites a little bit, but then Facebook pages. I mean, there must be 30, 40, 50 out there called light workers in one form or another, which is cool. I don't think in any way any of them have tied it together or made an affiliation to me, who I think maybe started the term, and that's, I think, totally fine. What I'm not as cool with is there are people that think you can have a light workers group, gathering page, website, etc., and not include God. That's where we kind of part ways, myself, who maybe coined this phrase, and other people that use the phrase. And I'm kind of proud of that thank God that we didn't leave God out, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But people, it's okay that they do that, but it's because it's a term I may have thought of. It seems a little weird that there are people using it and not associating God or connecting God into the picture. So to me, there's reasons for that, and that is God is the source. God is the ultimate light, and we're working on remembering our light, which is like saying we're working on remembering our divinity. So how do you have a site, a website, a group, a t-shirt, or anything else, an event, that would leave God out of the picture? So I don't agree with that. So if anybody's out there, or if you know of any groups, if you belong to any light worker groups, maybe tell them about this little faux pas. All right? Anyway, so furthermore, this conference that started developing, the Universal Lightworkers Conference, there was something else that kind of helped, it sort of helped merge in this topic of a conference being created. And what merged was, I had already been a speaker for many years, because this is already, early 1990s that this is happening, developing. And I had already been a speaker at conferences and a keynote speaker and all that. But I thought to myself, because I love being around people of like mind. I mean, I just dig that. It's just like, it's one of my favorite things. It's in my top 5 or 10 in my life. Love being in surrounded with other people like that are into love, God, whatever, spirit, joy, happiness, whatever. Love that. And so I had been in all these conferences, but I noticed the conferences kept being created by people, not inspired by God, but created by human minds. And there were all kinds of them. Expos, remember those days? Expos, conferences, festivals, all these different terms. Well, they kept getting created, but with people's heads creating them. And then those people would do what seems logical, as the mind likes to be logical. They started kind of going, well, let's have conferences, let's have whatever. And the way that you make them good or great is by having lots of names. We want a lot of big name people. So they would hire this guy and that guy and this girl and that girl, and so on. So there would be lots of us. It could be 10 of us. It could be 100 of us in some events as speakers. And I'm watching going, this is kind of like one of those things that people do. Buffets, that's what they call them, sorry. Buffets, smorgasbord, is that the same? So they had this smorgasbord or buffet of speakers. And so all it became was kind of a collection, eclectic speakers. They didn't necessarily need to know each other, like each other, get along with each other, or even coordinate their talks to where they supported each other. And I was feeling this because, I'm pretty sensitive, right? So I'm like, there's something missing. And I watched it. And then one day I was at a conference and there was another speaker or two. And one of them was Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman. And I went over, I don't know if Steve remembers this, but I went over to him, because this might have been the first time we met, second time we met actually, but there were many years between the first. So I said, hey, wouldn't it be amazing? I mean, don't you like these conferences? And of course he does, and he has a booth and he does his show and everything. He loved it and I loved it. I said, but do you notice how everybody's separate? What do you think about a conference where the speakers actually like each other, where they get along, where there's a theme? The theme would be God, and he said, oh, that sounds wonderful, and he wasn't just placating me. I mean, he was picking up, and he said, that sounds beautiful. I said, just like think about the best things of any conference you've ever been at. And we'll create a conference, meaning I'll work with my team. I said, we on this end, we'll create a conference that's like the greatest hits. But God is the theme. And so that's what we did. So I talked to a couple of friends and said, one of them, Robin Rose, she had already helped me. She put together some conferences in the Pacific Northwest. So she kind of ran those with a dear friend of mine named Bruce. And so they ran those a couple of times, or several times, half dozen probably. So I said, why don't you just think of segueing into this other thing called the Lightworkers Conference? So she said, well, I'm open to it. So it was just ready for her to take her festivals, conferences that I had kind of suggested that she do, and I kind of helped design that with inspiration. And then I said, now let's launch it to another level. I can do pretty well helping people as a muse, a person who gets ideas, but I certainly couldn't do them all myself. So I said, let's launch this. And it was great. The first one was held, I think, in either Houston or Dallas, Texas. The conferences ended up being twice a year, actually 3 times a year. It would be once in Florida, once in Texas, and once in Washington State. One of those each year. So there were 3 a year. And then sometimes there was a 4th because we also did a few in Brisbane, Australia. I think we might have done Melbourne as well. I don't remember, but we did a couple in Australia. So it was like, wow. I mean, it just took off, and this was all through the 90s now. So it was fantastic, and into the 2000s. But it really launched the careers, believe it or not. And this, some people would dispute this, but there were speakers that were hired that, I'll just say it this way, instead of launching their careers, because some people, like their agents may not agree, but a lot of people that hadn't made it big yet went to the conference. We had the wherewithal, Robin and company, to be able to say, which speakers do we want? And here's how that conference was created. First, it's about God. Second, all the speakers have to be willing to stay the whole weekend. They're not allowed to fly in on their private helicopters, roll out a red carpet, arrive and then be airlifted out like they're just royalty. Hell no. We said, no, these people have to be humble. They have to be good. Not all spiritual teachers are good speakers. Not all, authors are good speakers. They have to be good. They have to be good teachers, but they had to be good people. And that's, believe it or not, hard to find in the spiritual teacher community. So there was a lot of, selecting, and some of them were selected and then really not invited back if there was a problem after a time or two. And some were just invited temporarily because they might have been regionally popular. So they were invited to their region. And that's always cool because you could give them kind of a start. But a lot of speakers were given their start. They might have been known, might have had a book, but not launched yet. That includes Greg Braden, Doreen Virtue, I think, had one book. James Twyman, John Mark Hammer. There were a lot of people that came through that place. And let me add this, some that were already well known. Dan Millman, Alan Cohen. There were lots of people that were already well established, already with a few books and best-selling books by that time. But there were others. Patricia Cota-Robles, Norma Milanovic. She was great because she did We the Arcturians. And although she didn't maybe write a lot of other books, there was an integrity, there was a beauty to what she did and what she shared. Gary Renard also, he had just started launching a bit bigger, I think, when he attended. But most of these speakers were there several times, not once or twice, but several times. And so it just gained this reputation, but it wasn't just the who's who. It wasn't just the speakers. So there was a vibe, and the speakers would go, even if it was their first time, they would go, wow, this is different. Attendees, wow, this is different. there would be people coming there from other conferences, promoters from other conferences, and they would pull some of our leaders aside and say, "Can I pay you to tell me a bit more how you created this?" And and it was funny because a lot of them didn't know it was my idea and my inception or inspiration, because I tried to stay out of it after I kind of launched it. Robin and company would use me sort of as a guide. Hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? So I would always be able to download the inspirations that guided it, all but maybe the last year of it when I just didn't have as much time. But all those years it was very, very big, man, very popular, happening several times a year. And after, like a lot of things in the early 2000s, after 9/11, a lot of things changed. A lot of hotels, their flexibilities and so forth. But also, sadly, a lot of speakers, even the ones that got their start here, once they made it big, they started asking for 10, 20 grand for a spot. And they would actually, and their agents would actually still push Robin and company and say, no, we want the money. It's like, well, wait, your folks, I won't name names, but your folks kind of got their start here. Oh yeah, and they really love you guys, but they want money. So that is kind of a turnoff. Now, that's also a lesson for us all, that there are light workers and then there are authors. And they immediately split off when they start saying, I want what I want, how I want it, when I want it, etc. When their stuff becomes more important, because that wasn't what the conference was all about. So there was this vibe, and people would say, how do you do this? Can you train us? Can you give us bullet points on how to run a conference like this? Because we're going to create our own versions. You couldn't. You actually couldn't, because you would say, well, it's first because it's God. You dedicate it all to God. It's like starting a whole nation, like the Israelites or something. It's like starting a people, light workers, that are dedicated to God and to light work. So this whole movement kind of started that way. And it's great that Patricia Cota-Robles was part of the conference, because she, unbeknownst to us probably, she included the term historically, for the record, somewhere around 1990. And then even Doreen Virtue, somewhere in there in the later 90s, she wrote a book called The Lightworker's Way. So there are references historically. Me in the 80s, Patricia Cota-Robles 90, Doreen Virtue in the later 90s. Where that's kind of seems to be the progression of where the term came from. But if I would have used the term in a newsletter in the 80s and the Lightworkers Conference would have never been created, then it would just be a term. It would just be something out there, but it became a movement. It became a consciousness. Now, it's kind of strange because a lot of people now are using the term, and maybe some are claiming that they created it. I even heard that there's internet fighting over which one of them created it, and they had nothing to do with it. They just, one might have started a website before that one, and so they're kind of bickering about using the term. And that's kind of like where religions split from spirituality. You have pseudo light workers that are fighting over things and so on. So it's kind of strange that way, but this is all still relevant, because this is for us all. This is this is a term that symbolizes you and me and anyone that's actually a bit more dedicated to the path, wanting to make a difference. So think about this. This all starts with God. And then you could say the light of God, the second thing in the hierarchy, the light of God, and then you could say it sort of comes into manifestation as the light of Christ consciousness. I'm not talking about Christianity or religion, but the light of Christ consciousness. And it's like, wow, this is pretty cool. It's the light, the remembrance, the spiritual intention, all that goes from God to the Christ consciousness. Then you could say the Divine Mother, you could say angels, light beings, which are higher dimensional beings. You could say there's basically any being in the whole hierarchy of creation, and there are many layers, but any beings within that layer, their layer, that is dedicated to this remembrance, you could say as a light worker. So it's kind of cool. I don't know how that came to me or why that came to me, the term. It always just makes sense. Just like I had a newsletter called The Light Bearer. We're bearing light. We're taking light. We're holding they call it the torch, passing the torch from teacher to student and so on. So it's kind of like that. It just always made sense. And I realized, if we are the light of God, then we're light bearers, we're light carriers, we're light bringers, and so on. So it's one of those things that just made sense, and then it kind of became a thing. Also, for some of you that can stretch your imagination a little more, it's not just angels, which you probably believe in, the Divine Mother you might believe in, Christ consciousness you might believe in, humans that are light workers you might believe in. Believe it or not, there are light beings, higher dimensional beings that are part of this light work experience. They can be called galactic beings, galactic federations. There are such things. There are people from other star systems, Sirius, Arcturus, the Andromedan system, all kinds. Now, it doesn't mean just because there's a star system that they're always light beings, benevolent. Some are malevolent. But there are beings, that are so-so from other systems. I won't maybe name those, but the others, it's kind of cool. So there are beings on Earth called light workers, but then there's light beings that are part of the light worker movement. And they're from other star systems. So I think that's very cool. An old term you could say for light workers was the Great White Brotherhood. But naturally, as ridiculous as humans can be, some of them started saying, oh, wait, Great White, as though it's a race, Brotherhood, we're the sisters. It's like, oh, geez. So this is where you get kind of the nitpicky, politically based pseudo-spiritual people versus real spiritual people. So you could call them the Great White, call them the Great Brotherhood, Sisterhood of Light. So the old Great White Brotherhood had nothing to do with race or gender or anything like that. It was called Brotherhood because that's a term we've used on this planet many times. And, so it's kind of like mankind. They could have called it the one of mankind, and someone could have said, what about womankind? That's just ridiculous. So let's not nitpick and be silly like that. But that's where you get some of that. So if you hear somebody, using that terminology and getting all weird about it, just tell them to lighten up. Light, get it? Anyway, so the whole idea is the Great White Brotherhood in the old days, that was the term we used, but there was no gender or no race because it meant light. White meant purity. It meant light. It meant transparent, clear, clean, pure, not white-skinned. Only dumb human beings could twist such a thing, but that's what they do. So please, be patient if you ever hear or read in the older books, Great White Brotherhood. It's the Great Brotherhood Sisterhood of Light, if that's what you'd like to use as a better term. But that brotherhood, sisterhood that's the old term you could say for light workers. People, the Great White Brotherhood was basically a term used for beings dedicated, and some were embodied, humans bodied, and some were intergalactic or light beings. So, that's kind of where that comes from. And you even have ancient civilizations, Lemurian, Atlantean, that had in each of those ancient, continents, civilizations, and so on, you had light workers. You had people part of the Great White Brotherhood. We even have, some of you would be familiar with things like Ashtar. Ascended Masters is another category of people that are part of the light work. We could say that light workers is the human term for light beings, which are higher dimensional, but we could say we're all light workers too, and it would be fair to say such. And what angels do in their dimension, what light work angels do in their dimension, humans are doing the same work, just in a different dimension, so it looks different. So, don't think that it's just angels that are out there making a difference. We're all making a difference as long as we're doing light work, which is working to remember our light. Now, it's not just to remember our light. It's also to remember the light in each other and to help others to remember their light. So the good news is we have a Facebook page. You can request to join Universal Lightworkers Facebook page. You might find it under Universal Lightworkers or the Universal Lightworkers. I don't know which, but just check it out, please. And then there's also a website that's been around forever. It's been changed a few times, but it's currently, so it might look a little sparse, but it's currently being renovated. So it's being cleaned up, and the art and the layout and all that. So you can come in and check that out. But please note it somewhere to check on that website now and again, the Universal Lightworkers website. Universal Lightworkers, it means all of us. So here's what I would like to see, and this is what I had as a vision from the very beginning for that website. But again, when it was developed, websites were in their infancy. I mean, like, they're not even infancy. They were in their, thought stages. So, they were just a spark in people's eyes. So when we developed our website, it didn't have all that I originally wanted it, but technology's caught up. So we're able to do more. But here's what I'm looking for. The site is being renovated. It's as of today. We really did a quick turnaround and kind of fixed it up and have enough to present to you tonight. But you can go look for it. But I want it to be, it's the hub, because I sort of helped coin the phrase. And the Lightworkers Conference was the first event, major event, that was the gathering throughout an international level and cosmic level. So that website, I thought, should be the hub. Please make it so. Guys, please respect it as such, but let's make it a hub. I would love any people out there that are considering themselves light workers, submit articles, and I would like to have a directory there of articles. Doesn't mean we can print everything. If you want to tell us, hey, I have an article about my deceased aunt so-and-so, we may not include it unless she happens to be an ascended master wearing a turban named Kutumi or something. But I want it to be high level. I don't want it to be just personal stories. But it can be channeled, but it has to be high. It has to be light. We're not looking for anything fear-based, conspiracy-based, hateful, or whatever, of that nature. Controversial, political, we're not interested in that. Light work, man. It's about light work. So I'm looking to make it a place for people that are into ascended masters to share their material. It's not like we're looking for fees or anything like that. I just want it to be a hub where people can share. But please respect it as such. Let people know that it is the place, it is the hub. There are absolute big name people who have permitted themselves to be associated with topics related to light workers, and they're featured on there. We have videos on there. I would love it if we had a lot of videos from the years of the Lightworkers Conference. And I'm going to sound like I'm very old, but in those days, we didn't have the technologies. Robin arranged having audio tapes for years of them. And I think the company that did the audio tapes lost a lot of them because they switched to DVD. So we still had tapes. No, they weren't 8-track tapes, but they were cassette tapes. So a lot of that got lost. Unfortunately, because we're talking about the biggest lightworker names in the world doing talks that we could have shared. But we're going to try to salvage some here and there. But unfortunately, videos were the last thing happening at the time. So we don't have a lot of those, but there are still a lot of people that we did have, and so they're getting posted on there. So it'll be a great resource place. And then in that website, there's also like an online store or a network. And in the network, if you make jewelry related, if you make music related, I would absolutely love for you to post your material on there. I don't know that there's anything financial related to it. We're not asking for fees. We're asking for respect, and that's about it. Be a light worker. If there's ever kind of fees, referral fees or something, that's between websites and people. But generally speaking, I like to give, I like to share. So as best we can, it's all open and free. Not to be used, as you know, whenever you have given yourselves so much, it's easy. People see it as a sign of weakness and want to use. We're not looking to be used. So we do draw the line. We want stuff, material that's related to light work. We want people that have the right feel and integrity, just like the Lightworkers Conference days. The best. We wanted only the best and maintain the best and the integrities. And that's why that event had such, just a resounding vibe, of people's comments and the overall feedback. Those of you who have been to the conference, some of you are watching here, you could always, post a little note about how amazing it was. Thank you. And also, there'll be a blog, I imagine, of some kind on the website. But so we're a few days behind developing the site. I apologize for that. My staff doesn't have anything to do, so I think they were all on vacation. I'm just kidding. But anyway, just consider joining us. Now, I'd like to share a little tidbit The 7 traits of a light worker that I wrote down. And I want to share this because I think it helps just to kind of land the topic, okay? First of all, light workers, there's a feeling of a call to return to the teachings of Christ consciousness, or the nurturance of Mother Mary, or the protection of Archangel Michael, and or living a life like of Mary Magdalene. Like, in other words, there's a vibe to it. So if you're feeling like, traits of a light worker, there's a vibe, there's a calling to something greater. Second, having a growing interest in topics that are related, like the early Christian group, the Arthurian Knights, Knights Templar, Lemuria, different people, groups that shared the same light worker vibe. Third, your old thought systems and opinions are going to start falling away. Okay? And some of you are going, oh, that's me. Yeah, old opinions and thought systems start to fall away. That's a good sign that, you've got the bug, the good bug. All right? 4, having a greater experience of unconditional love, which includes having less buttons to be pushed and a greater sense of peace, even if you have buttons that are pushed, just a greater sense of peace, an ability to bounce back. So unconditional love, okay, is 4. 5, limitations such as race, gender, genetics, family patterns will no longer be applying to you. You've probably, many of you watching a thing like this, a presentation like this, you likely have already been feeling this. Just like that just doesn't apply. My family, their genetics, their opinions, their patterns, and so on. It just doesn't fit. You just don't feel like you're that race, that religion, that culture, that whatever. And some people find that to be quite hard and quite almost insulting. How dare anybody think that they should break away from well, that's because they're old school and getting offended because they're old school. That's what old school does. Gets offended by everything. So just, if you're doing it, you're doing it. If it doesn't apply to you, the old things don't apply to you, great. Then you're probably more like a light worker, or at the very least, on the spiritual path. If they do apply to you and you want to be, I still want to be old, judgmental. I want to be family, racial, blah, blah, blah. I want to not have an affinity to higher callings. Then don't call yourself a light worker or beyond the path. That's fine. Call yourself human and religious, or a sleeping human, or whatever, okay? The 6th one, you feel a disconnection from people that represent the past, old ways of being, as well as a growing sense of love and acceptance around soulmates, soul groups, spiritual family. It's kind of a replay of the last item, but it sort of has its own unique piece, which is that it's not just I don't feel a connection to the old, it's giving a little extra mention of the new, that you feel a calling, looking for your tribe, that kind of saying. Looking for my tribe, but what does your tribe look like? Spiritual, more loving, more light, more playful. They believe in inspired poems or creative inspirations. They believe in asking what my dreams meant last night. They're looking for deeper meanings to things. They might be called towards similar, it's not like we want to be cookie cutter, right? But there's similar things. Some of you are going to be light workers that are into ascended masters. Others are going to be like, I don't even know what that is, but I'm into A Course in Miracles, which was written by an ascended master, you see. So there's going to be connections that you may not know of. And if you really want to be on the path and you really want to be a light worker, then you start recognizing there's connections to everything in a beautiful way, all right? And lastly, feeling like the tribe or friends you're looking for are ready for a profound spiritual awakening rather than being of a shallow, mundane nature. So that's kind of building off the last one. The people you're attracted to are not just something you're looking for, feeling a similar vibe, and that they're kind of, unique, and that you're feeling a unique connection to them, but they're also people that are not mundane. So you'll see a common theme in all 7, basically. There's an excitement to launch into something new. That all 7 are kind of similar in that sense. There's an excitement to go higher. Higher meaning God, Christ consciousness. Higher meaning a new tribe, soulmates, friendships, channeling, inspiration, poetry, ascended masters, angels, light beings. It's all connected. All 7 are connected. It's all about that that better life. But light workers recognize we're not sitting here just fanning ourselves with the vibrations of angels. We're doing something with it. It's there to improve our lives, and we tend to feel a calling to use that to improve the lives of others. So I pray this has made sense, and I pray that I've covered enough about it just to help you guys understand. Even if I had no affiliation with its beginning, Lightworkers, I could still say to you this simple thing. It's basically those on the spiritual path going to the next level, which is of service, to make a difference for themselves and others in this world. That's a light worker. I also am adding, light workers include galactic beings, ascended masters, angels. All of us are doing light work. I defined what light work is. We're made in the image of God, which is light, and we're working to remember that light. That's light work. Quite beautiful. It should be quite simple and clear and clean. Somebody may say, I don't agree with his definition, but if I created the name, I'm allowed to have the right definition, if you think about it. But that is the definition. I mean, who could argue with God as light and that light work means remembering God? So if there are authors, websites, whatever they are out there that sort of think light work is nothing but improving the planet, but yet you're not using any connection of inspiration to God, then you're really more of a planetary worker, and you should call it that. If you're trying to just save species, then you should say, friends of the animals or something, worker, Light work is bigger than just the earthly plane. So try to see that it's got such a deeply spiritual focus, instead of leaving the spiritual piece out of it. I hope that made sense. And thanks for indulging me for a moment to let me share also the history of such a beautiful thing as the Lightworkers Conference, Universal Lightworkers Conference. I really, I would love it if I could snap my finger and make conferences like that continue, but they didn't end. What happened is the world changed. And so hotels changed, their rates changed, their rules changed. Speakers started wanting big, big bucks, even though they kind of were sort of indebted to the Lightworkers Conference. They just started saying, no, it's all about, if I was on Discovery Channel now, I want 10 grand. Because we usually kind of just, all these speakers did this a lot as a service. I mean, we all did there was a stipend, $500 or $1,000 or something like that. And that was great for everybody when they were getting their start. But after a while, they think of it as an insult, which is insulting, But anyway, it's insulting to tell the people that helped you get launched, to kind of say, no, I want the money. But that's kind of cool that they do that. First, they're honoring their thing, but also it lets the conference know you no longer have this kind of a level of light work, integrity, service. So you're probably not the best speakers for this anymore. So that's kind of cool that, those things sometimes we learn the hard way, and that's kind of what happened. But the event again didn't end. The world changed. And so I'm saying this because some of you are going to say, and I get this when I'm on tour, oh my God, I used to go to the Lightworkers Conference. Are they doing it again? And I said, no, oh my God. And they're really, sad and hurt. But it's hard to explain in just a sentence or two. And this is all relevant for tonight, guys. The world did change, and it is changing for the better in a lot of ways. But typically when we have something spiritual, like we have this page group that you're watching, things often come along to end them because they're good, and the world loves to snuff out what's good. That's why there are predators that prey upon children. That's why they killed Jesus or Martin Luther King Jr. Or that's why people, start making up negative stories about Mother Teresa. They don't like anything to be good for too long because that would shine too much light on them and their darkness. So the world tends to do that, and so it takes its toll. And God bless all of us and all the people that helped continue the Lightworkers Conference for so many years, because it was and is a lot of work to do those kinds of things. But when it's like pulling teeth to get speakers to commit, and when one company became like the largest New Age publisher, they started also going, some of their people came to the Lightworkers Conference and went, this is kind of a good thing. And they started doing their own conferences. And what they did was they had contracts with their speakers that they're not allowed to speak at any other conference. So pretty soon, all of the speakers at the Lightworkers Conference, many of them were not allowed to return because they were under contract with this, this other publishing house that made it big and started running their own conferences. So that's another example of how interesting, almost funny, but also evil that things can be, even in the world of light work. Darkness tries to infiltrate. It infiltrated the leaders of this country that tried to start things really cool, you know. It infiltrated the Summer of Love, you know, in the 60s. It infiltrates a lot of things. It infiltrates musical groups, spiritual centers. It infiltrates and tries to create a darkness. It's up to us to fan the flames of the spark into light so that it cannot fade. And that's again what a light worker would do. Just fan the flames of that light. But it does help when we stick together and help each other out. It's never going to feel very easy and good for any one of us to be an individual light worker with no community. So please let the Universal Lightworkers Facebook page become that community of light work. And on that page, you can share, you're allowed to propose, posts and things. It could be New Age music, as long as it's not just New Age music, but something that seems kind of celestial, angelic. We'd like to keep it in that really high vibe. We'd rather not have your cousin who's trying to make it big as a certain kind of singer that's a certain aspect of pop music, that wouldn't really be light work. So, try to keep it light and light work related, okay? Please remember that we've got Sundays. Come and join us. We're going to have a really cool, we have every Sunday about 9:45 Pacific time. Sunday services, sacred services, they're live. These sacred events, we have prayer, sacred readings, messages, meditations. It's almost like attending a sacred service, Sunday service, except it's a spiritual experience rather than a churchy experience. So this has been a dream of mine since, the 90s somewhere. But it's just the technology again wasn't there. So it's happening. So I've got this team of people that are making it happen, and it's fantastic. And I really want to extend a lot of extra thanks to my team, and you guys can do the same to them, because everything you're seeing tonight, what I'm talking about, the posting of this and the new Facebook group, that's all been developed in the last 24 hours, just so that they could try to keep up with what was coming to me as a new idea. So I really appreciate that they're willing to try to jump through hoops like that. It takes a lot of patience to keep up with this kind of mind sometimes. But anyway, join us for Sunday services on Sunday, 9:45 Pacific time. And then we also have Wednesday night class starting at the end of this month called Healing the Heart and Soul. It's an online course. It's only for a few weeks, and it's powerful, powerful, powerful. We've had for a couple years now, online courses every other month on different topics. And this one is on soul level healing. So it's going to be absolutely cool, but please sign up as soon as possible. Last but not least, we've got, we're going to go visit John of God, another light worker, a spiritualist, a channel of the most incredible, he's most powerful faith healer on the planet today, and join us. If you want to, you can go on your own as well. And if you can't afford or don't have the time, feel free to go and look at his website and find a translator who can become your own personal translator for you to submit for a long distance healing. They're a few dollars practically, and donation, and they're very powerful. They're very effective. You have nothing to lose, so just consider it. I gain nothing from you going to them and doing that. But if you want to join us in our tour, we already have what is my largest Sacred Sites tour ever. We have dozens of people already signed up. I've always liked to have a couple dozen, but we have several dozen now going, and so you're welcome to join us. And I think that's about it. That'll be in August. So that's posted online here, but also on my website. So just stay connected as best you can. Lots of love and light to you guys. And there are other Lightworker pages, websites, Facebook pages. I don't know that they all have the depth and integrity. Some of them look quite beautiful, I think. So check them out if you like. But don't stay on them if they're not spiritual or God related. If that's my suggestion. But if you already are on one, ask them to watch this, and maybe they're interested in knowing maybe some more about the roots of this, or maybe they would like to network with us and exchange websites or whatever. I love that. I love just the networking, the love, the lightness. Okay. Love loves love. God loves love. I love love. And I hope that you love love. So love to you all. Peace be with you all. Bye-bye.